Welcome to the Region of Solution podcast, where we give you the insider's take on the impactful work and initiatives being undertaken at ESCAP. I'm Veronika, Verner.
I'm Mitch. Hsieh. Welcome to another episode of our series. Today, we take a look at what efforts are underway at ESCAP as we try to push for equity in development. There couldn't have been a better set of guests than our friends from the Social Development Division and the Environment and Development Division.
In this episode, our focus is the Leave No One Behind commitment made by UN member states to push for equitable development. Here at ESCAP, we believe that people are at the heart of the sustainable development goals. Prioritizing the most vulnerable and marginalized members of society is crucial.
With the aim to prioritize those often unseen in the quest for development, the LNOB principle ties in with the concept of urban development, where cities offer a great testbed for the drive towards achieving the SDGs through policy planning and implementation. Here, the ESCAP LNOB platform and associated indicators can prove to be game changers.
Today we have with us ESCAP colleagues Siragusa and Selsah Pasali. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to ESCAP? And if you may, ask a more loaded question. Where does this commitment to inclusive development come from?
Thank you, Veronika. I joined the UN through the Young Professional Program right after finishing my PhD, which was on development economics, on gender and development, to be precise. Being into the UN, I was very lucky to start work directly on gender issues at ESCAP and ECA, and this took me to different parts of the world, Asia Pacific, Africa, and then with UNCTAD, a bit more global experience. But in all cases, it's been quite data-driven and analytical.
Alice, what about you?
My path to the UN was a little bit different from my colleague. My background is in architecture and urban planning. I also have a PhD in urban and regional planning. And before joining ESCAP, I joined actually a few months ago. I have been working 8 years for the European Commission in the Joint Research Center, working on urban and territorial development. And my interest for this specific topic comes from a couple of experiences that I had when I was a student. Specifically, one was a long workshop of a month in the slum of Alexandra in Johannesburg, when I could really realize how much urban planning was affecting, in that case, segregation in a city. And this is where I understood also the importance of urban public policies and how this will affect the design of specific neighborhoods, public spaces, and therefore how it will affect the life of people in these neighborhoods and how they will affect also then their possibility to improve their lives. And then I carry out this interest over my career.
That's terrific. Thank you both for sharing a little bit about yourselves. We always start our episode with one of these very simple but basic questions. What solutions are you working on for the region?
I'm working as a sustainable urban development advisor. And this means that I contribute to different action in my section. At the moment, I'm working on preparing a e-learning course on the SDG localization and local climate action for the ASEAN Pacific. It means that we are trying to collect all the knowledge from different activities and prepare an e-learning course that will be available for free on the ESCAP e-learning platform for all policymakers, member states, local governments that are eager to learn more. And this will include a number of case studies, example projects from different Asia-Pacific countries that can inspire and provide information to other cities that are willing to replicate similar examples.
There are lots of different solutions we're working with, but particularly on LNOB, we have an interactive online platform where we can showcase who's furthest behind and who's furthest ahead in SDGs to respond to the LNOB pledge of the 2030 agenda. This solution relates to the fact that we can no longer say there's no data. There's actually plenty of data. But the problem is more like data is not being analyzed and it's not being used. So the solution that we're putting forward is help member states use data that they have and the latest data and nationally owned data, not necessarily international data, that they can then inform their policies, the design, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, the whole process.
If we could just back up a little bit, can you maybe explain the broader concept of leave no one behind and also why it's so crucial in the context of sustainable development?
Absolutely. Leave no one behind. LNOB has become such a phrase that we take it for granted. It's all about moving beyond averages and trying to find groups in the country, not necessarily at national, but also at local level, find those who do not have access to basic opportunities, basic services. The easiest thing to understand is the average, but then there's variation. We can start with the average, but then we need to really get into the variation to see those who have access and those who do not. And this is a core part of the agenda on sustainable development. It relates to all the prosperity, people, planet, peace. When people are left behind, you have issues that relate to all the 17 DG goals, and majority of the indicators that have a human aspect are basically lagging. Sometimes a majority are left behind. Sometimes there's maybe tiny niche groups who are left behind, but then it makes it all the more important to go ahead and identify them and then target your policies accordingly. Different SDGs are leaving different people behind. When we look at internet use, for example, we see that older persons are left behind, particularly those who are living in rural areas and maybe a little bit poorer. We see this across the board in Asia Pacific, and this relates to the digital divide. Youth are doing much better in internet use and mobile phone ownership. But when you go to another SDG, then you end up finding another group. For example, the case of access to family planning with modern methods. There's a lot of unmet need, especially by younger women living in urban areas who happen to be highly educated. It's a group that you wouldn't perhaps think about as a furthest behind. The key issue here is that each SDG has a different angle to inequality, and each inequality comes with a different intersection of circumstances that leave households or individuals behind. And that's why we need to have this like data-driven approach to disaggregate the data and find out in each SDG who are furthest behind. This information is crucial for making policies effective, right? If we don't know who's furthest behind, who's having challenges, then the policies that we devise will probably not make any difference in the lives of those who are at a disadvantage.
Certainly makes sense. Alice, just wondering, how do cities come into play then?
Well, the Asia Pacific region is one of the most urbanized regions in the world. More than half of the people living in the Asia Pacific lives in cities. The projection says that by 2050, our regions will host 3.5 billion people, representing 60% of the world urban population. Asia Pacific cities are still expanding, are still growing, and we have to tackle urban inclusion and urban planning with the principle of leaving no one behind in mind, to be sure that the newcomers, the new city dwellers, we have very good living conditions. For example, almost 600 million people in Asia Pacific live in slums. And we know that living in those areas in particular means that you have experienced segregation, that you have low standard services, less access to opportunities like education and jobs. And this means also that the vicious circle of poverty and exclusion continue to replicate also on the younger generations and the new generations of city dwellers. Urban planning, urban design define the way, for example, you move in your surrounding, you access to services. Let's imagine a person that lives in a city and needs every day to commute to go to work. And if you're commuting to work, pass through places that are unsafe for a woman, you might avoid a certain time of the day. You might have a restriction in your mobility. I think it's very important to understand that how we plan city, how we manage cities, how we manage the services and the access to services in the city really affect the life of people, and understanding what are the groups and the different conditions that city dwellers experience during their life can definitely shape in a different way policies and action, both by member states, because some policies, of course, are designed and implemented by member states, but also by local governments. We work a lot with cities that produce what are called voluntary local reviews. These are reports that the city published to measure the achievement of the SDGs at local level. And we have a very good example of best practices in the region. I'm talking, for example, of the city of Fatih in Istanbul that published a VLR with full disaggregated data by neighborhoods. And the maps shows very clearly that some areas are behind in certain SDGs than others. And the different groups of different conditions of people affect, let's say, the experience and their achievement of specific targets.
Going back to the LNOB platform, any challenges that you were hoping to address when you created this platform?
One of the key motivations behind this LNOB platform, which happened before I joined the team, so I really feel like standing on the shoulders of the giants that introduced this platform back in the day. The situation was, when we talk about households, individuals in vulnerable situations, there's usually a long list of groups in there. It could be women, youth, children, older persons, persons with disabilities, indigenous groups, and certainly they are left behind and vulnerable, right? It's not helpful to just lump everyone into one category of or broad category of persons in vulnerable situations and assume that everyone is uniformly and similarly left behind across the board. People are not affected equally. So it's all about trying to bring that nuance, leveraging data, leveraging innovative methodologies to unravel the inequality with more nuance and specificity so that in a very specific location. This doesn't have to be a country. This could be, as Alice was mentioning, this could be a city, this could be a municipality, it could be a division, province. It really depends on how data is collected to say that, okay, let's zoom into this place and we are looking at a particular developmental outcome, whichever area it may come from, economic or social, and really map out the differences in access. Without this information, it's very difficult for policymakers or practitioners to act. We quickly realize that there are so many developmental outcomes. There are lots of years with available data, lots of countries at national level, at sub-national level. So you cannot really write a report, and let's face it, people are not reading reports as they used to in the past. So we really needed to go beyond having a simple platform that's interactive with the user, accessible to the user, to be able to really pinpoint. If you're coming from a particular country, you want to see in that country, in the rural area of one of the provinces, you want to see what's the situation. The solution that we brought is really trying to address this challenge to the policymakers at local level or at national level we're facing. We are seeing more and more take up by both governments and also non-governmental organizations, CSOs, academia, local governments, national governments, our sister agencies within the UN. And we're kind of starting to build this really important relationship whereby we used to be data poor, we're becoming data rich, because as countries are using this platform, they're saying, wait, there are other indicators we're interested in, but sure, you don't have access to that data, so here it is. You can have our data, analyze it, and tell us, and then also build capacities, local capacity in the member states so that they can do this analysis on their own. In the future, we had a unbelievable experience of having access to census data from Palau, a country with 15,000 individuals. And we had that data all anonymized, of course, but we worked with the government to be able to pinpoint the furthest behind groups at national level, but also in the cities.
You say the platform has a lot of data and things. Are there specific tools that are also a part of the platform that users can find there to help make the principles of LNOB reality?
More like the tip of the iceberg. We have information for 19 SDG indicators there for 30 countries at national and sub-national level. When the users come to our platform, they will be able to get directly some visualizations and some narratives on what they're looking for. Two, I think, relevant segments in this platform. One where we have all the knowledge products that support this platform, from the methodology, which is based on machine learning. We're using only open source statistical tools, and our code, our algorithm itself is open source. So when users come to our website, they can actually request that we share the source code so that they can start replicating it and modifying it to fit to their context. It's really the whole package. Come in, see what you find there, and then start exploring, get in contact with us, and we will be more than happy to build capacity through code to make sure that everybody is on the same page.
In addition to the LNOB platform that Selsah was presenting, ESCAP in October is actually launching also a new SDG localization platform. And the idea behind it is to have one entry point for countries in the region and cities or local governments to find all the knowledge of the SDG localization of ESCAP. And these actually include different type of tools, the e-learning course, a series of policy briefs that contains example, case studies, reference tools to knowledge, and also a series of what we call VLR stories or SDG stories. So short interviews, video, case studies to present really those front runners in the region, cities, provinces, subnational states that are implementing innovative action to achieve the SDGs and to tackle the principle of leave no one behind. For example, there is one case studies on the province of West Java in Indonesia that produced its first VLR last year, and they include an entire section on the leave no one behind methodology, and they try to use local data to measure who are the furthest left behind in the province and examine also the progress over time in the last 4 years. I think it's important to recall that the knowledge of the local governments on the ground that knows their community can add additional value and depth to understand and analyze and interpret the data that come from statistics. So there is a multiplier effect of innovative action in cities, but cities is also where a lot of inequalities concentrate. For example, we know that the climate change and the impact of natural disasters affect different people in a different way. And we know that women living in cities that are poor are the ones who are mostly affected. So we have to also remember that when we design, and if we design cities that are resilient and that are sustainable in terms of management, we are able to improve the life of many people. And this has a multiplier effect.
Thank you for sharing your insights. Before we wrap up, what is one thing maybe you'd like for our listeners to take away from our conversation about Leave No One Behind today?
In the past, the narrative was all about there's not enough data. How can we analyze if we cannot have access to data? But I think this is really changing. This is changing because there are really increasing number of sources which are making data available publicly, but also member states, national statistics offices, most of them have now pretty decent dashboards and they have platforms where they can share data. It is getting more and more possible, let's say, that data access and availability is increasing, but the take-up of this is not there yet. And this needs to increase a lot more. It's a challenge, partly because LNOB is something that maybe countries don't want to showcase because it's inevitably showing a weakness. We're inspired by countries who are really bold and brave and they embrace this. And they say, this is a problem, we're going to address this, and we're going to use data and innovative methodologies to guide our work in the future.
My final message would be that if the ones who are left behind are not included in sustainable development, we will not achieve the 2030 agenda. We need to have everyone on board. And the last thing is that with the project developed by my division, which is called Urban Act, there are also a series of webinars on this topic, specifically on conscious cities webinars that are available online, and who are interested can definitely browse it and look for it.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing your perspective on how we can use data in cities and otherwise to leave no one behind and to achieve sustainable development goals. That's all for today's episode of A Region of Solutions.
And of course, don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to our podcast for more inspiring stories from ESCAP because we will be back.
Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and be a part of a solution for our region.
Bye, everybody, and have a good week ahead.